Thank you, and good morning everybody. My name is Max Farrell. I'm the Chief Exec of an organisation called the LDN Collective. So I just thought I'd introduce myself first before I talk a bit about the Farrell Review 10 years on. So I was a partner at Farrell's Architects and Urban Designers for about 10 years. My background is in public affairs and communications, but while I was there I did a master's in urban planning, so I started getting more involved in projects. And then about halfway through my time there, we were invited to lead a nationwide review of architecture and the built environment by the then Culture Minister Ed Vaizey, and that then took up 2 years of my life, and it was an amazing thing to have been able to have done, and I'll tell you a bit more about that. But just before I do, so the LDN Collective, in many ways it was, for me, it was a legacy of the Farrell Review, because it was about thinking differently about how we collaborate within the built environment. And I often thought that it was interesting when you look at other creative industries, how they come together to form teams and when it's multidisciplinary. And the example that I often use is film, where you have a sort of every project is different, but it's often in a particular place, and you have a cast and crew, and they do form collectives, and often they collaborate with people that are local and place-based because of the nature of what they do. So I thought, well, why not try and set something similar up within the built environment? So I started to list out the number of different skill sets on one of our bigger regeneration projects, and when you include everything from development, planning, design, and then all the specialisms, things like community engagement, social impact, I got to a number of about 50 different skill sets, and I thought, well, that's the good number then to be a sort of one-stop shop, including the storytelling side, so filmmaking, web design, graphic design, and so on. So we do have almost 50 members now, and we collaborate on projects throughout the sort of built environment. We, unlike the sort of bigger, you have to excuse me, the fonts didn't carry over from the presentation. My graphic designer would have a heart attack. But we collaborate on projects together, and it's a group of SMEs and individuals essentially. But so it's a sort of bottom-up, multidisciplinary, unlike what you tend to get if you have for a multidisciplinary offer in the built environment. Is often you go to the bigger corporate firms, which are often engineering-led, like the Arup, WSP, ACOM, etc. So it's a different model, and then arguably we don't have the overheads. Those companies I mentioned tend to have hundreds, if not thousands, of staff and offices to go with it, but we're also able to be a bit more agile and more holistic. So these are the types of projects we're involved in at the moment, sort of either placemaking and urban design, which lends itself to a multidisciplinary approach. We're doing sort of new settlements and some urban regeneration projects. Branding and communication, so branding for places, but also for companies and our members and clients. And then communications, we do a lot around thought leadership. You saw an image before around a project called ParkPower, where we work with the City of London and National Park City to think about how people are using parks and green spaces differently. And one of our members, Edge Urban Design, I don't know if Hannah's here yet, I think she might. There she is, yeah. Was the winner of a competition along with another of our member earlier this week. The NLA had a global competition looking for new ideas to reimagine London, and that was a very proud moment for me and for us, for Hannah to have taken that award home. So, and then social value, community engagement, co-design has almost become a sector within itself, and it's something that's increasingly important, but does require different specialisms to come together to do it properly. So that's the sort of introduction to me and what I've been doing since. But the Farrell Review 10 years ago, one of the sort of main things that people associate with the Farrell Review as an outcome was our recommendation that every town and city should have an urban room, somewhere where you can go and you can understand and debate the past, the present and the future of that place. Somewhere that's independent, it's not hosted or owned by the local authority, or a developer with a particular project to promote. It's a neutral space, and it's broad, and it involves schools, and it's about outreach, essentially. And that was a real success from the Farrell Review. There's now 22, I think, around the country. There is a network. I'll come on to that and tell you a bit more about that. But when we were first commissioned to do the review by Ed Vasey, it was very different in many ways to the Urban Task Force in that, first of all, it was intentionally very broad. We were given these 5 themes: education, outreach and skills, which arguably is 3 separate themes, but we looked at that as one theme: design quality, cultural heritage, economic benefits and built environment policy. And you can find out more on the website, and there's the reports that you can download. And there's an image there of one of our panel meetings, and I put that one up because there are 2 of their panel members that were very instrumental in this. Robert Powell from Beam in Wakefield and Hank Dittmar have both since passed away, and I think if anything I'd like to dedicate this presentation and event to them, because they're incredible figures. And you know, Hank was involved not just in the Prince's Foundation, but in the American New Urbanism movement. And Robert was a real champion of arts in placemaking. And before that became a more ubiquitous thing to do, you know, the term cultural placemaking didn't really exist then. And I think that was a big sign of progress that's evolved since. We had other panel members, including Alison Brooks, Victoria Thornton, who was very good on education from Open City, Lucy Musgrave of Publica, Thomas Heatherwick, who came to one meeting, but at least he came to one. And we were very lucky from that point of view. But it was also different to the Rogers Urban Task Force because, and it may well have been because it was commissioned by the coalition government rather than an incoming Labour government. We weren't given much money at all to do it, so it inherently had to be collaborative, and we reached out and we partnered with other organisations like the NLA or RIBA and particularly their regional offices. And we had these workshops around the country over a period of several months, either regional in Bristol, Birmingham, Manchester, Newcastle, or topic-based around each of those themes that I mentioned before. One of the things that came out of all of the workshops was that there are sort of cross-cutting themes. And these cross-cutting themes, which really sort of weave throughout the recommendations and conclusions, were about having a new understanding of place-based planning and design, much better understood, I think, nowadays, a new level of connectedness between government departments, institutions, agencies, professions and the public. If there was one thing we were trying to do with the Farrell Review, it was to make architecture and the built environment a bigger public issue, like health and education, and particularly linking it to sustainability and climate change, and saying, you know, with the built environment responsible for 40% of all carbon emissions, it really is one of the most critical things for everyone to understand and get on board with how we do things better. A new level of public engagement using technology, and a commitment to making the ordinary better, improving the everyday built environment. And we felt very strongly about that. And in the review, we use a photo of a Maggie's Centre, which tended to get a lot of attention from the architectural community, beautifully designed buildings, a lot of resource going into it, a lot of magazine covers. And then we would zoom out, and it would always be in the corner of a campus that was the NHS and hospital that had grown, and it was dysfunctional and unsustainable, but yet nobody was talking about that. Everyone was all focusing on the new and the shiny. And I think that the everyday built environment, as others have mentioned, affects all of our lives and our quality of our lives. So trying to get more attention on that. And then obviously sustainability and a low carbon future. Rather than having that as a theme in its own right, it ran throughout everything essentially. So just to kind of pick on a couple of the main sort of recommendations that came out on each of those topics. So with education, it was one of the harder ones to get traction with in terms of the Department for Education. We were told very clearly that the built environment, architecture built environment would not be a subject in its own right. But so we thought, well, the best thing to do then would be to sort of integrate it within all the subjects where it is relevant, because it can be taught within geography, science, history, art. The key thing was to develop teacher training modules and toolkits in order to do that and give teachers the ability to do that. So we came up with some examples like den building, or using the game Minecraft, which was becoming increasingly popular with children. That's all about urban design, really. So when we were trying to push the idea of STEM becoming STEAM and including the arts or architecture, and although that still is a very much a live debate, and you know, and in many ways it was about putting the ideas out there and creating a movement, rather than it being a sort of top-down, sort of more policy-led thing. So the architectural education we thought was really interesting, partly because the review was done around the same time that tuition fees were brought in. And what we worked out was that if you do the typical length of the course, 7 years in this country, and you pay the tuition fees and the student loans, then you ultimately, and then if you earn the average salary throughout your life as an architect, you can never pay it back. It's actually, you'll always be in debt. So we thought, well, something's structurally wrong there. And what that means is that it tends to be people who have money in the first place that get into architecture, and that's not a good thing, particularly when we are trying to improve the everyday built environment, social housing. How can people that haven't lived in those situations design those types of buildings? So we looked at things like apprenticeships, sandwich courses. One of the outcomes of the review was that a new educational institutions were set up, like the London School of Architecture, that did offer those types of things. And then obviously the one that got most attention in terms of urban rooms, and others have now carried that legacy on through the urban room network. And there's just some examples of near our offices, Farrell's in Church Street, in Sheffield, and also my father Terry, who donated £1 million to Newcastle University to sort of establish a permanent urban room there, called the Farrell Centre, which I highly recommend you going to if you're ever in Newcastle. And then some of those things that I just mentioned about the London School of Architecture, a different approach to education, the Farrell Centre, and also public practice. When we put out the consultation and call for evidence, one of the responses was from Finn Williams and Pooja Agrawal, and they had this idea. At that time it was called Plan First, because it was based on the sort of Teach First model about people that do well in terms of their qualifications of design, go into local authorities for a few years, many of whom ended up then staying in order to get a better understanding and to help get the right sort of skill sets into local authorities, now known as public practice, of course, and they have a number of cohorts and are working with a number of local authorities. Our other big recommendation, and when it was covered in the press when we launched it, was about proactive planning. And this was came as a result of us sort of looking at how planning systems operate elsewhere in the world, and the fact that our system is unbelievably reactive in the sense that it's all open to negotiation. Anyone can submit a planning application for anything, anywhere, at any time, which inherently takes up time and resource, because if things were agreed more in advance, not just in terms of the policies, which tend to be words, but spatially in terms of the shape and form of cities and density and types of uses, and to have a vision that people can see and understand for what their city would look like in 10, 20, 30 years if this all, and so that was our main recommendation, and again that played into the whole public practice, getting better resource and expertise within local authorities to do that. And then we used the word place to try and bring together a lot of the disciplines and professions that tended to be quite silo-based. Less so now, I think, but certainly then. So, for example, we use the word place as an acronym for planning, landscape, architecture, conservation, and engineering, each of which has its own professional institution, many of them don't do things together or do things at the same time, but without knowing, and actually it's about being more joined up, essentially. And so what we were saying is if we're going to be doing more proactive planning, we shouldn't just be doing design reviews of schemes that are quite piecemeal and are very advanced. We should be doing place reviews which are broader and earlier, and that then would enable us to develop these visions for towns and cities that schemes can fit into, rather than just trying to push the boundaries of what's possible and often what developers can think they can get away with. The Place Alliance was a great sort of legacy of the Farrell Review, and it was led by Matthew Carmona at UCL, I don't know if he's here, but and others, including many people that are here in the Urban Design Group, very much. And Hugo was talking about some of the reports they've done since on housing quality and skills and so on, and public practice, of course, which I've mentioned. I just thought I'd put this cartoon up because I thought it was funny at the time. Hellman, the brilliant sort of architectural cartoonist, but the point here was that, you know, whilst architects are debating styles, the planet is burning, and I think that and that's my dad in the middle. You can probably tell by the eyebrows, but or is it a face mask? But the point is that we need to put a new value on existing buildings as a resource, essentially, and something that is much more commonplace now. But we use this mantra of long life, loose fit, low energy to really judge any new building. Is it going to last? Can we retrofit what's already there? A lot of local authorities now have retro first policies, which I think is a really big step forward. Can it be adapted? If it's an office, can it be adapted to residential, like the Victorian buildings often can be, and that which is often why they've endured. And also low energy, and using design to really maximise energy performance in terms of solar gain, insulation, orientation, and so on. This is just an example in 1980 of where the new build scheme on the right was what was fashionable and what was being supported by most people, and it's amazing to think that wasn't that long ago. And when Father Terry proposed restoring and infill and retrofit of the existing buildings, it was really frowned upon and laughed at, and he was told he was standing in the way of progress. And, you know, that wasn't that long ago, but actually now there's a much stronger argument for doing this. It's not just a sort of cultural identity that has a value, it's the embodied carbon. And as we all know, that's now becoming critically important. So we did say at the time, should we look at a different approach to listing more modern buildings, because they inherently have a value that isn't just their architectural style or cultural value, if you like. It's a carbon value, and just 0.2% of all listed buildings since 1945. Then finally, on the economic benefits, we looked at exporting our skills within this country, because we do have a very sophisticated approach. All of these different institutions and professions that over the years that is readily exportable, but then looking at what the challenge is, and this was the diagram of the Guardian at the time. When we did the review, we just passed the point where 50% of the world's population lived in cities, and the projection was that in 2040. 2/3 of the world's population would be living in cities, which is a massive increase. So that in the bottom right there, you can see that's equivalent to building a city the size of Birmingham every week for 20 years. So our argument there was city making is the most important human endeavour, and actually if people aren't already interested in it, then they really should be, because everyone's moving to cities. And it's all, that's going to be the way of saving the planet in terms of sustainability and retrofitting existing cities. So the dark blue are the countries that are predominantly urban. So the countries that are predominantly rural, so less than half people live in cities, are by far the biggest. So that's kind of the message there, is these are all going to be undergoing massive change, whilst in this country most 80% of the buildings that we'll live in the 2050 are already here. whereas in the other countries it's completely different. And so exporting our skills we felt was important, but also demonstrating the link between design and manufacturing, which I think wasn't very well understood within government, certainly. And in terms of, you know, the Treasury Green Book and GDV and value of design, actually it does relate to building, construction, airports, historic retrofit, infrastructure, you know. So one of our other recommendations was about how we value buildings and having a more sophisticated approach to that. And we use the example of you get more information about buying a washing machine often than you do when you buy a house in terms of its energy performance and sustainability and so on. And it's easier for people to understand as well, which is absolutely key. So this was used quite a lot, this diagram, because it really does show the kind of craziness and quirkiness of British government, because the built environment initially was all within one Ministry of Health. It then got sort of sliced and diced over the years. It did all come back together again in the 70s under the Department for the Environment. But by the time we did our review, it was across several different government departments. And architecture sat within the Department for Culture. Our argument was it should move to the Department for Communities, Local Government and Planning, because they had a much closer relationship, and it was about, and it would give architecture more clout, essentially. So that was one of the recommendations that was taken up. It did do Ed Vaizey out of a job, but he wasn't that upset about that. I think he realised that was the right thing to do. This photo was extraordinary because this was a meeting that we convened with representatives of 11 different government departments that all build things. So there was, as well as housing, there was education, building schools, health, building hospitals, justice, prisons. And one of the first questions we asked was, how often do you get together to talk about your procurement, commissioning, design standards? And they looked around at each other and said, well, this is the first time we've ever been in the room together and talked about it, actually. So well, that in itself was very interesting and revealing. So one of our recommendations was we should have a chief architect in the same way that we have a chief planner, chief construction advisor. And after that, they did create a new role. They call it the head of architecture, which Andy von Bradsky was the first to take up that role. And that was one of the sort of outcomes. Other outcomes were the House of Lords set up a Built Environment Committee, which even now to this day is looking at things like high streets, and I gave evidence at that, which was quite scary, although it was not the most controversial of topics, but it's always quite intimidating being in that horseshoe situation. But it showed that the Lords were taking it seriously, and they did want to actually do something about this, and that in itself carried a lot of weight. So that's, I think, is a sort of canter through the Farrell Review from me, and looking forward to the workshop. And in terms of whether or not we need a new urban renaissance, I would say absolutely yes. And these things do come in cycles, and it is like deja vu, you know, with a new Labour government, Oasis reforming. It's almost as if it's written in the stars. So yeah, I think one thing that Sunam Prasad said in our meetings was that just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean you stop talking about it, like climate change and the other brilliant quote that he made was that good people can get around bad policies, but good policies can't get around bad people. And I think that is also true, which is why we focus more on a movement and public engagement than necessarily policy. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.